Okay, now let's go back to this function right here that we're passing to the Drupal get form function. So again, the scaffolding admin settings parameter that we're passing to Drupal get form says go look for a function called scaffolding admin settings and grab the array that it returns. And we're going to use that array for a form. So let's go ahead and look at our inc file here, scaffolding.admin.inc. You can see that our .inc file here follows a very similar structure to the .module file. We have our opening PHP tag, we have our commented out ID tag, we have a Doxygen style comment here that indicates what our file is all about. And then we have our function that we were looking for, scaffolding admin settings. And we have a Doxygen style comment above this that contains just a short description of the function. Now we haven't talked about the Forms API yet, but this ties in very closely to it. The basic idea is that the way Drupal builds a form is through an array of parameters or settings. This array contains a set of inputs. So if we wanted a text input and a text area input, we would have two arrays that contain settings for each one of those inputs, and those both would be included in a container array that's then passed as the form variable to Drupal get form, and then it's rendered. Now, what we're doing here is creating a very simple form that just has an example text area input, and then we're running it through a function called system settings form. What this function does is it takes our form array and it adds some resources to it to make it a more full-featured settings form. So there's a lot we don't have to take care of at the beginning. When we go over the Form API, we'll discuss this function in particular in detail. Let's go ahead and take this opportunity to look at this form array and what's being passed through the system settings form function. So first we have our form variable, which we can see is an array because we're assigning a key another array. The key is the name of the input, and so this should be unique for every form element there is. And the array contains a set of parameters that tell Drupal how to render this input. Each one is prefixed by a hashtag to allow Drupal to know that this is a setting and not some other type of data. So the type is the type of input. In this case, we're going to use a text area. The title is the label that will display above the input, give an indication of what the input is for. Default value tells Drupal what value the input should have to begin with. And this parameter uses the variable get function, which is a Drupal core API function that allows us to grab data from the variables table in the Drupal database. Variable get has a counterpart, which is variable set. And variable set is one of the things that the system settings form function gives us. So instead of having to set our variable manually when this form is submitted, the system settings form will handle that for us. But then the next time that our form is loaded, we want to grab the value that was set the last time it was submitted. And in this case, we're grabbing a variable called scaffolding_example_setting. So this follows a convention of namespacing that you've already seen in our function naming, which is that we take the module name and we prefix that before any name for a function, and in this case, any name for a variable. So our name is scaffolding example setting. And the second parameter that we set is the default value to variable get. In this case, we want it to be blank because we don't want to fill it in at the beginning with any particular value. The next line, description, tells the Form API what to display under the input to give the user who's filling out the form help about what's supposed to go in that input. So the title should be descriptive, but then the description enhances this a bit, and this can be very useful, especially for more complex inputs. Finally, the required setting sets whether this item is required, whether there has to be a value in it in order for the form to be submitted or not. And finally, we return the form, but in this case, we are returning the form wrapped in the system settings form. Give us some freebies and simplify the work that we have to do. So if any of that wasn't clear, don't worry, we're going to go over the Form API in great detail in a future video, but this is just a sample to demonstrate how the Form API interacts with the ability to create a settings form for our module, which is some basic scaffolding for most modules. So let's go ahead and see this in action. So we've already added our scaffolding folder to our custom folder in our Sites All Modules folder. Now let's go ahead and go to the modules listings page and enable it. I'm going to scroll down to the Build a Module grouping, and I'm going to enable scaffolding. You see here when we set the block module as a dependency for this module in the .info file, it shows up right here, and we get a green enabled, which means that we're good to go for installing this module. If a user tries to install this module, even when the dependencies aren't met, Drupal will look for those modules and ask whether the user wants to enable those, and if so, we'll go ahead and enable those as well as the module. Let's go ahead and click Save Configuration. Now we have two pages that we need to test out, the Help page and our Settings page. So let's go ahead and go to the Help page. And here you'll see this is listed alphabetically, and so if we go over, we see our scaffolding link in the S's. Let's go ahead and click that. We see our default help text. This is the help text for the scaffolding help page. Awesome, so that's working good. Now let's go ahead and go to our configuration page. If we go to admin/settings, we should see our module listed here. There we go. If we click on this, we'll see our form that we built. It includes some of the help text that was added with the hook help function, our example text area, and if we add some information here and click Save Configuration, it will load it back in. And that's what our variable get did in collaboration with our system settings form function that we wrapped the form array in.